I think one of the important life journeys for me is that my parents both came for the same type of reason, but not knowing each other whatsoever, from the Netherlands to Baghdad. They landed in Iraq around the same period of time in 1955, and that's where they met. And my mother was in the diplomatic side, and my father was a businessman who was in the trading industry, just starting. They were young, 24, 25, but were they? And they just wanted to get out of this country and find their own truths and find how they could figure out what is this world about. So they both came in with that kind of curiosity. We were in that time in our country was in that time very secular. We had all these different religions and translated into political parties and translated into the way we organize the TV and everything. We have a lot of collaboration as well because of our life conditions with the water. So we have always learned from the start in our country the essence of collaborating. No matter what your opinions are about something, you have to take care of the dikes together, because otherwise you're going to drown. It's no use having your own dike if the neighbor is not doing it. So that's kind of like, the mixture. But anyway, so they landed in Baghdad, and that's where I was born, and my sister, and then in the Iraqi context, and then they moved to Singapore, where we came into a Chinese context, and then we went into Malaysia, where I came into a more Malaysian, with also quite a few Indians context, and English expats community, and then to KL, the capital. And my parents were always like, no, we're in a new place. We don't know how long it's going to be. Go out, figure out by doing stuff, you figure out what are the rules of the game in this society. That's how we do it. That's how they did it. And that's, what I received as a child. Always immediately actually being put into all kinds of clubs or whatever. And that was just the way to learn the language, to figure out what was going on. And so that has given me what I took out of that as a kid was, oh wow, there's underlying things that I can connect to everywhere, and there are differences. So this sense of that there's unity and there's diversity was actually very much what I took out of my upbringing. And when there was a civil war in Malaya, just before we left out of that time, that was also what came up. How is it possible that these people kill each other while in essence we are the same? There must be another way. I can still remember that sense in myself. There must be another way that we can live together without doing this, because in essence we're kind of all the same. So I think that's part of an important part, of course, of my upbringing. And another thing that I really took out of my youth was that my parents kind of said, you have talents, and your purpose for life is to figure out what your talents are and manifest them and put them in service. And I think that was also partly because my mother was part of a very open Protestant church, but my father was a humanist. He didn't believe in God or anything. So they found this as a way of combining it both and giving us the opportunity to just figure out what is needed and both of them really about, this is my own responsibility. So it's my responsibility to figure out who I am, what I have to offer, and to put it out into the world. And whatever way, doesn't matter. It can be any way. Because of course our conditions changed all the time, so there was not kind of like, if you're going to be one thing, so that is another thing that I really have in me, that this search for what are these talents, which is an ongoing story, which is still part of the search, and how do I put them into practice, which means also serving, of course, myself, otherwise I won't continue to exist, but also to the outside and connecting it like that. So looking at ways to, not only for myself to figure out what it's all about, and not so much in a spiritual context. I wasn't actually very much at all in a spiritual context. but just figuring it out in the here and now. Um, uh, at a certain point, from one day to the other, I became ill. So I was when I was 30, I was being to Africa, but with hindsight, it's just the drop that made it shift and change for me. And I was put into my body just stopped working actually. So I was diagnosed after all kinds of other things, but at a certain point, after 2 years or something, they said, "Well, you have chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's it. You're not going to be able to do anything else. You're just going to be lying in your bed." Um, and what I figured out took me about 10 years in that process, together with my husband and my family, actually, and my friends that were very supportive, was that this was about. I wouldn't have said it like that because I had no idea that that was the path. But looking back, I can see that I had to shift into consciousness and move more into the spiritual dimensions. But I didn't know that. I couldn't even really properly think. But my mum kind of asked me to go to somebody who uses muscle testing as a way to inform what your body needs at that point, and works with the energies and the meridians and all this more spiritual stuff that I now use consistently, I would say. But at that time, I had no idea what she was doing, and I didn't have any bandwidth to even understand. That was probably very good. So I just surrendered. And gradually, that helped me to kind of like get a bit energy back and a bit clarity, and also to be able to function, but in a way that I could only function if I was really accepting what was now in the moment. And so that was a great training, I must say, for mindfulness, which I didn't know was mindfulness. But I figured out at a certain point that every time when I was having a little bit of energy so I could do something, if I would start to think about, oh, later, if I get more energy, I'll go and do that and that, then immediately I had a fallback. But if I just took what was there in the moment and did whatever I wanted to do there, and my husband was very much also like, do what energizes you, nothing else. That was our kind of like what we found out was the best way to do it. That, of course, made me develop this capacity to really stay in the now and in the not knowing, because I had no idea what was going to happen tomorrow and how I would wake up. But now I have something I can give attention to. And that is a capacity, if I look at what I feel is important in the world now, is so extremely important. I would never have realized that was such a life learning path. At that time, it was just surviving. And every time out of that, when I kind of got the hang of it, and then also started to move into yoga, mindfulness, and these more spiritual paths that I still didn't call spiritual, but still, I did a lot of those practices. And I was somehow, through a headhunter, introduced to a company where I then became shareholder and partner that was developing learning materials for schools to bring in the context of the business world and civil society and all kinds of places in the school context by showing how that makes sense. So not giving, so bringing in like just economics in the French lessons, or history in science, or by doing it like that, we developed actually very creative ways of teaching kids, sharing them why they are at school, because the reality outside can help them to figure that out. And that was, so that was in the experience communications, as we called it. And that made, I think, that really awoke in me this, what I already have, that I'm seeing all these connections where we're perhaps trained in silos. I don't have that. I never see silos. I'm always seeing everything going everywhere. So then I was invited through the networking that I have also, very naturally in my system. I was somewhere, and after 2 years, that lady suddenly called me and asked me if I wanted to join um, um, a group coming for the Dutch government going to Bhutan, which I had no idea where that was. So very ignorant in that sense, but okay. And she said, it doesn't matter. I want your creative mind and the way that you can see connections that are unusual, because that's what we need, because we want to figure out what the Bhutanese government and the Dutch government could be working on simultaneously and together, because this was in the time that they were starting to figure out that also in development cooperation there needed to be a I can't say the word. You need to say the word.
Representation.
No, that you're both doing it on both sides. Reciprocal.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocal is the right word.
Reciprocal work.
Reciprocal. Yeah.
So that's what we need. So I decided, well, okay, I was offered that, and I was actually only working in the Netherlands, as I was kind of like, okay, but I thought, well, okay, I'll go. Why not? This is a beautiful opportunity. So I went there and had a great 2 weeks, and we had, and I thought that I had quite a good capacity to attune to different cultures. I mean, that was my upbringing. I worked for the airlines for 8 years on international flight, so I kind of had this idea, well, I can connect to other life conditions and cultures. But I made so many mistakes there in developing these programs. So I came back kind of like totally confused and with the sense of, oh, wow, I am missing such large parts of the picture. What's going on? And somebody sent me then, and then I'll get to the Hague Center. Out of that Bhutan network, actually, I got this invitation for a session around the Dutch identity. And we were in turmoil at that time in 2004 because we'd had 2 political murders in the few years before that, which happened, and we were kind of like, our nation was kind of like, what's going on? And I had found out there in Bhutan that the fact that they are going for gross national happiness gave so much focus in a diversity of projects that I thought, yeah, well, that's what we've been advising companies as well. Have a red thread. What's the red thread in the Netherlands? Doesn't exist. So maybe I can contribute to that, because I was shifting in wanting to shift in the work environment. So, and I thought I would set up a foundation for Dutch identity and using experience and everything that I'd learned to do that. So I went to this event, and that was the beginning of the Center for Human Emergence. And Don Beck, the founder of Spiral Dynamics, was there, and he was teaching with Peter Mary and with other Dutch people that I knew. And I was there, and I don't really understand what they're talking about, but it feels right. And in the end, Peter Mary made a call for who wanted to help build this Center for Human Emergence in the Netherlands to find this direction, where this next phase where we could be moving towards. So I said to him, okay, I'm here. I can join you. I don't need to have my own foundation. I can join yours. But you first have to teach me, because I have no idea what you're talking about. So we went into the training, and I built from then on with him and with a large group of people. In the end, we were with 25 volunteers and about 100 people that were regularly coming together, where we really practiced how to work with these value systems and how they attune to different life conditions and how that works. And in that process, I received this essay of Don Beck about mesh working, about how to bring together different stakeholders and let them get into a higher purpose. And when I read those 6 pages, I had this, wow, I want to do that. I want to learn how to do that. So that's what I've been doing actually since then, focused on in this context of conscious communities, because I saw that could be really a next level in which we would be as humanity moving towards this more loving place where we could be focused on really coming together instead of fighting. Not all having to be everything doing together, no, not at all. Having the discernment, but this unique expressions, and then out of that, creating new beauty and love and things like that. So that's how I came to this part. And then, well, Don Beck had only written those 6 pages in 1992 or 93 when he was with the Zulus in South Africa, and he hadn't really further developed that much. But that's what we then started to do. So we really started to figure out, and Don Beck was, he was also saying these new forms of collaboration. The best place for that to let arise is in the Netherlands because of the fact that we have so much in our DNA as a country, this collaboration around the water. So these next forms of collaboration that could come from a different consciousness, yeah, it would be logical that would be coming out of this country. So we quite quickly found quite a large resonant group of people with which we practice and explore. And of course, Peter Mary's an Englishman and married to a Dutch lady, but he has this international context. I have that. Some of the others have that. So we also went out into the world. And so we had this in the Netherlands for the world. And I would be doing stuff out in the world and we'd get back here and then we would mix it up again and come out. And so that's a bit how we've been working.
You weren't as open to these ideas, and somewhere along this journey, you opened up to them. Right? You went from being, I'm not going to use the word spiritual, but I guess this idea of transpersonal or a bigger purpose for everyone. So
it's not that I wasn't open.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference. So I did have, of course, this kind of awakening of 10 years of trying to figure out how to physically, because, as long as I stay on purpose, I have more energy than anybody, I would say, in my environment. So I now know since 5 years that I have ADHD. So I have this lot of access to a lot of energy and creativity and seeing all these patterns. But as soon as I do that, not aligned with my life purpose, my body immediately stops me and I'm back in bed. There's no way I can influence that with my mind. If I'm off track, the system stops and I'm forced back into doing nothing and surrendering. And when I figure out where I was off track, get back to that, then I actually quite quickly recover and can continue to have access to energy and inspiration and clarity of mind. So it was not so much and that I didn't want it but I just didn't I didn't know it was about. I didn't have, that were not the parts that were lighting up in my environment and in my surroundings. And through the illness, then of course something came into my awareness.
So it was the illness itself that was the catalyst for this change.
Yes, because I wouldn't have slowed down and gone into that kind of, and got into those kind of parts, I think, and I wouldn't have, through that, of course, I've developed an enormous amount of body awareness and body intelligence, not so much by the mind, because I'm very intuitive. I'm not a mind person. I don't know. I work with a lot of the theories, but I work with how I can translate them into practice and not what is exactly all the details of the experience of the theory that I can teach it. It's how do I embody what they're teaching, if it's sound, and where do I feel that I can work with it. And what are the questions that I have? And then I love to work with others that are much more focused on theory, on scientific background and underlying. I go back with my question and I say, look, I've tried to do it. This is what I do. What do you tell me? And then, that's the kind of very good way, I would say, for action research. So I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have come into that if I hadn't become ill. So yes, of course.
What makes what you're doing quite interesting is that from what I'm seeing, you're not just going to the kind of the spiritual world. It looks like you're going to the real world with real corporations and governments. And that's what really engages me, because I think there's kind of spiritual world, but it's kind of isolated from the real world, and it's good to integrate all of these things together now. So how did you get to be taken even seriously? How did you get into that real life space? And people are engaging with you, so obviously these ideas are working. So what makes you guys different? How you manage to have one foot in both worlds?
I think what we are really training ourselves for is so if I let me see, how would I say that? On the one hand, maybe I think it's because it's really driven from our own curiosity. How does the world work, and how can I contribute to that? So there's this. It's not about there's something out there. Yeah, there's something out there, but how? It's always related to why am I here? What is this about? How does this work? So in that sense, and I think all of us, all 10 of us, have that kind of like, we're trying to figure out what the world is about, and we keep seeing new parts. And then we meet other people, or they have new information, or things happen, and oh wow, there's another domain going open, or our value systems shift and change, and that means that you get a very different view of reality. And then there's something, okay, let's figure that out. So that's an intrinsic motivation to understand the world here and now, and to make meaning of it for myself, for my way of living, and how I contribute to life. So I think that's an important part that we all have, and we see that all these our life journeys have given us all kinds of experiences, and at some points they come together, and at some points you don't know why you had these experiences, and other moments they come up again. In the strategic connecting and in the mesh working, in that essence is that that by really connecting and finding where people are at in themselves, where a group is a multi-stakeholder or an organization or a village, a community in the village, what type of people and where their consciousness is and what they are at. If you want to bring them, so my goal is to bring actually more harmony and more possibilities to meet people really truly, to let people shine. So I'm not trying to per se get them into some kind of spiritual journey or whatever, because that's everybody's own free will. I want to really meet the real person, or the real organization, or the real context, and not have all these barriers in front of it, and to create conditions in which that can thrive. And in order to do that, I of course first need to really connect with the people, and then it's about, okay, so what can we be doing together to see how we can then create something which is fun and great. And that is actually exactly what I used to do, of course, as a kid. I would drop somewhere in Singapore at school, and then, I wanted to play. I wanted to have fun and enjoy and learn together. So I had to really connect. So how can you understand me? I don't speak your language. How do we do that? And out of that, then we could create something. So that is in essence what we're doing. So, and these theories and maps and practices, they help us to see a larger part of the reality, to be able to shift and see somebody else's view and reality. And then out of that come up with creative ideas, what we could be manifesting together, which would give us all an opportunity to express ourselves and to create something together.
I heard the word meshworks, and I read it on your website. What exactly, can you give a little bit of an understanding of meshworking?
Yes. So meshworking is really the weaving together the different talents, groups, ideas of individuals, organizations, foundations, doesn't matter, any entity that has its unique contribution to make and that wants to serve also a higher purpose that it cannot solve on its own, that it needs other parts. So it's for complex issues or very creative things that you want to do. and where you're prepared to commit yourself to that higher purpose, even if it requires that at some points you might need to surrender to some things that you thought might be good for yourself, but for the good of the whole, you'll continue, you'll stick to it. So it's asking a commitment to something that is larger than yourself to solve a complex problem. It's asking also that you're really listening and acknowledging where other people are at, and making some kind of discernment. What is yours to do to solve this complex problem, and what might you be better equipped to do? So I will focus on my part, you focus on your part, we co-create together, and we find solutions of a problem that we're trying to solve. So if it's something easy, and there are all kinds of ways of working, you shouldn't bother about it. But if there is a complex problem or an issue that we want to solve that requires multiple inroads, or perhaps not even exactly knowing what it requires, it's good to have multi-stakeholders, different voices in the room, and to see how out of that you can better understand the issue and come up with solutions that are, that none of them, it's actually really working with the collective intelligence in that sense, that none of them would have thought of perhaps themselves, but by combining our talents towards that higher purpose, we come up with new types and new ways of working that none of them would have done on their own.
The companies have to be open to this. They have to want this.
Yeah.
So is it just me who's not seeing it, or is there something changing in the world, or what's happened for what's happened in the last 20 years? Has there been a shift in the way corporations think to then be open to these ideas?
Well, I think there have always been people, because we're all also working in all kinds of corporations, but we just don't always know how to find each other. So that's the first thing. So one of the first things we did with the Center for Human Emergence was create an event with Erwin Laszlo and Don Beck and Peter Mary and Herman Wijfels. He was a Dutch, very well-known Dutch banker, ethical Dutch banker. He was moving to the World Bank, and he had asked 100 of his relations to come and listen to the people that inspired him. And he said to us, well, and then we can keep them in an evening, and you can do something for whoever you want. So we put out this call, and that time it was really, we were actually putting out a call to cultural creatives. And 900 people showed up, and I had designed it in a way that they were sitting like in a football stadium. You have this. I rented an empty factory. We put two of these. How do you call that? Tribunes? We call it tribune, but I don't know if that's an English word.
You mean stands where people sit?
Well, you sit, but then you sit.
They're raised.
They're raised, like behind each other, like in a football stadium.
Yeah.
So we put them opposite each other. I mean, in the middle we have then the speaking, and we let them do all kinds of wave exercises, etc., to show how we build energy. And it was actually for the first time, people are still talking about that event, because they were seeing each other, and they were seeing with how many they were, 900 people that all thought they were alone in the world. So, part of that program was also that they could really meet and connect and see that there are more of us. So this is this cultural creators syndrome, that we think we're alone, but actually we're not. But we don't use the normal ways of connecting, especially in those times. This is 2005, 2006, where the internet was just starting, in the more general awareness. So, through the normal clubs and the normal newspapers and TV, etc., you didn't get to meet each other. Now it's of course so much more easy with the social media, etc. But at that time it wasn't. So there are more out there, but we have to find them. So that's right. It's true. And that's why this work, what you're doing, is so extremely important, because it's a way to let people see that they're not alone, but
Right.
they just have to find a way to connect. And that's part of my passion, to see that, yes, there's this mesh working and mesh weaving, how we bring those together around complex problems to solve it. And there is this strategic connecting and community building, and to see how not only these different communities with different themes are now working on all kinds of elements, but now is even more the time to see how we can not only cross-pollinate, because that's what we also do a lot, but connect them more stronger together towards this higher purpose, because then we can really become a system of influence. So the vision was, in 2005, 2006, the vision we built based on, we looked at a few things. We looked at the Berkana Institute's vision around how you could go from a system of influence to a community of practice, as we call it, where you're really learning and learning how to be vulnerable and to practice to say, I don't really know how it works. Do you know? Can we learn and exchange a bit? To a meshwork, hey, let's do something together from this space. And we looked at how a caterpillar changes into a butterfly. And you can, with Elizabeth Sotora, she was sharing how we could adapt that as a social system, as a social architectural principle. That if we imagine ourselves in the beginning, they are kind of locked down by the caterpillar. But at a certain point, when they're strong enough, they start to connect, and then the butterfly can arise, and the caterpillar dissolves. So I had this vision. Okay, that's what we are to do. We have to strengthen these imaginal cells, and they first need to do that themselves. So I will go to different communities and help them to strengthen themselves. And when the time is right, I will start to bring them together. And in these other processes, we are practicing how you can then become a system of influence by really quickly collaborating and moving forward. So that's the vision, what we developed in 2005-06, and which I'm still working towards and on track. And the caravan is exactly serving that vision. So how can now I feel is the time that we can make more visible, more parents, we're here. And if I do that from a strong core, a larger strong core, so Co-Creating Europe is bringing together all these different groups. If they can become stronger, they can become more magnets and a catalyzer for change in their places together. I can make that visible through media, through your work, through the social media. Then more people can recognize themselves, and we can become much more a system.
Okay, that's kind of answers a lot of the questions. Have you got any? I mean, so I was looking at your website, and you.
Yeah, we're in a revision, and we're very bad at writing about ourselves.
What's written is to achieve a successful transition to a new evolutionary stage for humankind.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea for you what that means? Like, is there if you had to describe, maybe not micro, but in the macro way, what is that vision, and what's the transition? Are we going through it currently, and where is it going to?
Well, I think what I hope we're going to, what I'm trying to build anyway, is that we're really a heart-centered humanity that is working together with not only us with humans, but with all of life in a generative way, and creating beauty and joy, and seeing how, and that includes, when there's a time for separation or there's a time for death, that can also be done in beauty and in joy and in pain. So joy and beauty doesn't mean that it's always la 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 la. No, that can also, it's about life affirming the source of the creative force that we're feeling, and that has, of course, an ebb and flow, and it has, the winter, spring, summer, autumn cycle, and it has year cycles, and there are all these cycles around, and that we are in attuned to that, and that we play with that, and that we connect and let that inform us and surprise us, and let that be the mystery. So that's a very important part. And for that, we need different ways of organizing ourselves. So the governance is needed in order for that emergence to arise, because our governance systems now are blocking us, are keeping us down, are more based on fear and how to keep the fear going so that we stay in track. But that's just so complicated. If we are attuned to the life force, it's so much more easy, and the self-organizing capacity is so much bigger, actually. You don't need to check and control people that are doing the things they love to do, because they will do that beautifully, because that's what they love to do. So you just have to, kind of like align and connect, and it will happen. So that's the basis strategy also at Co-Creating Europe, that's what we're looking for, that people commit to do something that they really love to manifest, because then I don't need to check anything. It will happen. And I'll be surprised, I'm sure, because they will be looking at it from a different perspective. So that's kind of like on that scale, and also co-creating with nature and with the invisible world, and with the, so I also see it more cosmic, but that depends. Not everybody sees that like that, but that's for me also part of the game, I would say. And then on a personal body level, if you're speaking about that, somebody once said that we used to have 33 senses, and I think that would be magical. I could develop more senses to play with. So for that, of course, I need to develop not only my mind and consciousness, but I need to develop my body intelligence and all these other kinds. And I can't do everything at the same time, but there's still that force of, oh wow, what else can we be doing? So there's part in that as well. But it's also playful.
How can we go from where we are to where you want us to be, or where you think we should be? Or how is Co-Creating Europe facilitating that? Or how is the Hague Centre facilitating that change?
Well, one of the so it has to do with development of consciousness. And that is on the one hand, it's a collective, but it's also a very personal choice. So whether you want to change or not, or work on your consciousness, that's your choice. I cannot say anything about what you need to be doing around that. I can invite you into a space. I can create conditions. I can put out attractors that can let you look at things from a different perspective. And if I can add to that a loving environment, an energy that is not blocked, a way of bringing us together that makes you feel safe, as you're doing now for me, so that I can just share and speak and don't get stressed. By bringing in then also elements of nature, and designing the ways that we come together, if it's a larger group together, that we are at ease and at peace in ourselves. That makes it already possible for you to come more into your heart. Whatever your worldview is, doesn't matter, that already happens. And to come into parts of your brain that are not being focused on stress or fight, flight, freeze, but perhaps can let you relax so that you can access something else in yourself. And if you, out of that, can have a good experience, that already in itself is of value, because you've had that moment then. Well, that's good. And let's hope that feeds you somehow and gives you an idea and inspires you. I don't know, but I can give you that kind of experience. And then showing that there are multiple perspectives, and that there's not one truth, but there are different ways that you can look at. But it depends on where you are at. Do you know anything about spiral dynamics, about family systems?
No, maybe you can say a little bit.
It depends on your worldview, how you look at the world. If you're looking at the world from for example, if you're looking from a labor perspective, or from another political, you look at the world differently. To be able to see that there are also other opinions, and that we don't always need to judge, that's for some people in the phase where they are at, or the way they look at the world, quite complicated. then bringing in the topics or questions in a way that really connects to where they are at, and bringing in those topics that don't enhance fear but actually enhance confidence and advice to just be yourself and step forward, and to be aware of the fact that where are you damaging other people? Do you want to be damaged yourself? That's kind of such a fundamental principle that we have that nearly everybody can resonate with. So how can you bring that in and serve and let people come from that kind of place, is already a way to help. Now I work with, so in the Center for Human Emergence, or in THC also, but THC primarily works with conscious communities, strengthening these imaginal cells. That's actually been our focus. So there are a lot of other groups, conscious groups, that are working on developmental processes within organizations and within all kinds of groups of people, to see how they can come into their further development. Our groups that we work with primarily is in very conscious communities, or conscious communities that already have this intrinsic longing to move more towards unity. And that doesn't mean that we're always there. I mean, I also am sometimes totally taken over by my ego and forget it all, or see all these kind of separations. I do have sometimes fear awakening in me and taking over. But my training is continuously to be aware when it happens. Sometimes I'm not. But then if somebody puts up the mirror, that I immediately stop and say, oh, okay, I need to do something. That's the big difference, I would say. So working with these conscious communities that are having that longing already, how to practice, how to give them these experiences, how to let them express themselves in ways that they can show up, that they can connect, and that they can really also come up with new ideas. That's an important part. And then we also look at the conditions in the energetic realm. So I'm an eco-intention practitioner. So we work with energies, with measuring the energies, seeing whether there is you can come into a room and you can sense, oh, wow, there's a lot of stress here. So how do you do that? That is because there are different energies that are letting you feel that stress. We can measure that, and we can help the system, the place, the house, the room, to let that energy dissolve, transform into a more coherent energy, let the negative energies resolve. And we can also do that with the land. So we're developing these practices where we're really looking at how to work with the land and other entities in nature to actually create less stress, so that we are less brought out of balance and can be fully alive and coming into a more thriving consciousness, because consciousness is so important in what we're developing.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that that you're putting together these practices that you can bring to people, institutions, even governments, which allow them to go inside of themselves, look at themselves differently, look at other people differently, change, transform, but you're giving them these safe spaces.
Yeah.
So that makes complete sense to me. How open or how receptive currently is our current governments, our current systems? Is it growing? Do you face barriers, or are you finding it?
Yeah. Both, I would say, both. So, I use this double S curve.
Yeah. Okay.
Where you see that there's a breakdown and a breakthrough, and so I have my vision is here or here, and then so where are they at? So here's the old system coming towards its boundaries, and there's a group that really wants to hold on and fights that. And there are those that say, oh, we kind of give up, or we don't know, the complexity is now so big, how on earth are we going to continue, or whatever. Those are, of course, more open to change. Now, then the question is whether they're open to change totally. If they're open to change, there's always a not in that not knowing. There can be fear. So how can you relax that, and how can you support people to be in the not knowing and just say that's okay? Let's stay there a little longer, because usually out of that, a lot of creativity can come. Now we know much more about co-creation now than when I was doing this kind of work in the 90s, where people were kind of like, what is this about? So if you look at Otto Scharmer's work with the ULab, I don't know, do you know him,
No,
Otto Scharmer?
no.
So he's really been doing this kind of work about going into the not knowing, accepting and seeing the whole picture and staying there, and then out of that let new projects arise, really for product development as well, since with MIT, which helps, of course, having that scientific background. We've always been just doing it ourselves, but he has this, and he is now really having these quite 9 months trajectories where people have to work on projects on a weekly basis. And I think this group now is with 5,000 people online. So that is really going much faster. So there's really a kind of like an explosion of people looking for these new ways. And that's only going to be more because of, well, also, I mean, this time with the corona crisis is also, going to be offering much more opportunity, both. There's going to be more fear, there's going to be breakdown, there's going to be so much pain, there's going to be really chaos as well. So it's like a balloon, eh? You squeeze a balloon and part of it goes down and part of it goes up. So the part that goes down, yes, and we're focusing on, with a lot of compassion for everything that's going down, we're focusing on how can we serve and create systems that when there's a group coming up, that they don't have to go through all these processes, but they can just copy paste and take along what we've already developed and move on and put it into their own ways, because there's no one size fits all, of course, but there is inspiration that we can offer and practices. And the polarities which you mentioned in the beginning, so we're now doing trainings with our own team, and because I really feel that I felt in looking at the developmental processes that we were expecting for 2020, that the polarities would become more clear out into the open, and then how to work with those polarities and transcend them into something that goes beyond those polarities is an enormous help in solving these problems. Because if you can let people, instead of doing this, going up to something that transcends that, that is of course part of the solution, and that requires that we can hold that ourselves also in very strong, stressful conditions, and it requires languaging that as well. And so we're now doing explicitly our own extra trainings on polarity, because I am just seeing that this coming period that's going to become more. And the meaning making out of what's happening now, also how to do that. I'm being asked to do that, like in Co-Create Europe and like in other groups, more and more. So we're also looking at how do we, I know how we make meaning, but how do I explain that or share, and which parts do I share with others that might not be waiting for and looking for all this complexity that I always love to work with, but would like a simple solution that goes beyond the complexity. So that's part of our focus now, is for ourselves again. So I do that first with our own team. So we're in this, I've called it the multiverse meaning making session. So we're in this work stream these weeks, where we come together twice a week and then really see how we make meaning and what parts of it can we translate into toolboxes, or toolboxes, but to help people, especially conscious. So not helping everybody in the street, but helping people that have already so much developmental work done, like you yourself and like others. You just need a few points, and then you can figure it out yourself what serve you. And that's what we are trying to offer, these kind of tools.
So you mentioned the current crisis. What kind of advice would you give to people who are looking at this as an opportunity for change? What can they do? How can they approach this time?
Well, I think the first part is really about holding ourselves in trust, and realize when fear comes, because it's there, and doing practicing how to hold yourself together as much as possible, so that you can be present and that you can be in a state of trusting life. And that doesn't mean that you don't need to feel the fear, but the fear is not taking over. So that's the first thing. That's really about taking good care of yourself. So in resting, in movement, so I shouldn't be sitting 8 hours in a day after Zoom, but anyway. So your starting point that you said, yeah, I have to do it just 3 hours is very good. So containing ourselves in order to be able to have that certain clarity for yourself, say, and seeing that that it's multi-layered, that it is so complex. There are so many things going on at the same time, and also in different regions, in different countries, the responses are different, which I think is normal, because each culture and each worldview is different, and there are also things, of course, that we're supposed to be aligning. And to have conversations not about finding out what is truth, but what is perhaps true for me and not true for you, but maybe I can be curious to what you're seeing and see how that might inform me or not. And that we don't need to convince each other. We do need to have certain agreements that we're making, but and can we have conversations around that? Without trying to fight, but to see where is it that we could really be coming together.
Thank you. You've been really helpful. I really enjoyed this interview.
Well, thank you very much for asking questions and for a very safe space to speak.
Thank you.